Former Wisconsin U.S. Senate candidate Steven Olikara joins us now to weigh in. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So you believe there's a short list among this short list. Can you tell us what it is?
Yes, I think there's talk about a final three, but I think it's really a final two between Senator Mark Kelly and Governor Josh Shapiro. Both bring their relative strengths and weaknesses. At the same time, you have lots of conversations about the other 7 or so candidates. And I think for a number of them, whether it's Pete Buttigieg or Tim Walz, they're trying to get their brands out there, get their profiles out there, which is an exercise that's happening right now. But I think it really comes down to those final two.
Yeah, Pete's problem is that he is in the administration, an administration that is not popular. I think Kamala Harris is going to want someone outside the Biden administration to join the ticket. Now, obviously, we as politically minded media people put a lot of stock in the electoral advantages or disadvantages in having a particular vice president, when in reality, history has shown the vice presidential selection rarely mattering from the standpoint of the campaign. It can matter if something happens to the candidate, as is the case right now. So it can be consequential, but whether it helps or hurts ends up not mattering that much. But I think she would do herself some good by, she's looking at one of these kind of moderate governors, like Josh Shapiro is in a state she must win. Gretchen Whitmer is in a state she must win. Mark Kelly is in a state it would be very helpful to win, is a senator rather than a governor. So are those the kind of considerations being made?
Yeah, I think you're right that voters typically don't vote on vice presidents, but the vice presidential decision is a leadership test for the presidential nominee. It says something about how they value the character of their vice presidential candidate, how they create a balance, a contrast between their leadership and maybe bringing someone in who can account for maybe some of the gaps and experiences that the presidential candidate has. So I do think from that perspective, it's important. Now, to your point, it helps, for example, if you have Governor Josh Shapiro. He represents a state where Kamala Harris can get some deeper inroads and have a better chance perhaps of winning. But Governor Shapiro, and this isn't getting talked about enough, he addresses something that I think is one of the core critiques of the Democratic Party right now, which is that the party has become too elitist. In the first executive action that Governor Shapiro took, he said that no longer do state employees in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania need to have a 4-year college degree. You'd come from an associate's degree or other non-traditional backgrounds.
This is a wonderful policy. I love this policy, wildly in favor of it. That was a good one.
That won me over immediately.
Yeah.
We need more of that. So I think from a branding perspective, and certainly he's a great communicator, plus Pennsylvania, nice contrast with Kamala Harris. But I think Senator Mark Kelly, one of the upsides with him is not only his background as an astronaut and a U.S. Navy captain, but also he comes off in the way he communicates as a nonpartisan, non-politician, in contrast to Kamala Harris, who spent most of her adult life as a politician. So I think that balance will be helpful as well.
So these are my 2 least favorite guys, I'm going to be honest. Kelly and Shapiro on the list, I think, are the 2 candidates that could just crush the youth vote and the progressive vote, which Harris really needs to deliver a victory in 2024. Kelly, because he hasn't sponsored the PRO Act and being against union labor in this kind of administration, in this kind of political environment, I think makes him a non-contender. And then you also have Josh Shapiro, who has equated these pro-Palestine protesters on students' campuses to the KKK. That, to me, makes him a non-contender as well. How do you think these 2 will be able to overcome these weaknesses that might be prohibitive when it comes to casting a ballot for progressives in the youth vote?
Right, I agree with that. I think one thing that we're seeing with Kamala Harris as an example, where you remember during the primaries in 2019, that her prosecutorial record was put on full display during the debates, and that became an issue for the progressive left. Well, you fast forward to today, Charlie XCX, Brat, all of that is happening. And so she's winning this sort of Gen Z culture war, at least she has for the last week or so. So I think the question is, as you talk about a VP nominee, can they also tap in culturally to younger generations and speak to, I think, what is one of the core issues for young people right now, which is trust in government. Are they going to actually speak authentically to rooting out the corruption and addressing the inflow of money in politics? One of those issues I think would be interesting. And Mark Kelly, for example, I know that he's been supportive of stopping insider trading in the U.S. Senate and in Congress. So I think those types of issues might be able to overcome some of the dynamics you're talking about.
Yeah, and what she really needs to do to win is to overcome the skepticism that rural working class people might have of her or have had of Joe Biden and the Democratic Party in the three most important swing states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, where I think Kamala Harris, some of her, to the extent that she has deviated from Joe Biden, I mean, she did run to his left, specifically on energy and environmental issues, was more militant about banning fracking. I think there are some weaknesses of her candidacy. Now, she has the opportunity to reinvent herself. She has reinvented herself before. I don't know if this is a criticism or a credit to her that no one knows exactly what her political philosophy is. She's, as you mentioned, tried to have it both ways on criminal justice reform, being a rather tough prosecutor when she had statewide office in California, then kind of shedding that skin when that momentarily became politically supposedly unpopular, although I'm not sure that was actually, if that was just, again, processing the vibes of the national media moment we were having. I'm not sure people actually were calling on her to turn off her tough on crime exterior. So anyway, she has a chance to present herself however she wants to, and what she's going to need to do, in addition to keeping, generating young people and progressive enthusiasm, is really to speak to and relate to working class people in the swing states.
Yeah, I agree, Robbie. This is such a great point. When you talk about the must-win states, it's states like my home state of Wisconsin, and obviously Michigan and Pennsylvania as well. And you really do have to connect not just with the Democratic base, but also white working class voters. And Kamala Harris doesn't naturally present herself in politics as someone who connects with that audience. To your point, Robbie, she has been reinventing herself and might be able to do that again. But ideally, the VP candidate can bring in not only some unique connection points and issues, but also something about their personal story authentically connects with the story of a former GM worker in Janesville, Wisconsin, for example. So if they can do that, I think that would be a huge win. If Kamala Harris gets branded as the coastal elite from California, I think that makes it difficult to connect in Wisconsin.
What about someone like Andy Beshear? This is someone who doesn't have the problem of being anti-union in his record, and he's not someone who has this problem of calling peaceful protesters members of the KKK or comparing them to. And he has captured a little bit of that Gen Z culture. They're making fan cams of him to songs from the Brat album. And when he went on late night TV, he spoke about J.D. Vance, and he said he's not from here. He's not from Appalachia. He doesn't understand these people. And it started a movement on Twitter of people hashtagging he's not from here with things like he washes his cast iron pan and other things that make him unrelatable to the white working class of Appalachia. He seems to me a good pick. Why do you think he's not on the top of the short list?
Well, I would agree with you, Jessica. Andy Beshear probably should be on the list. This is so funny, and it's so interesting how vice presidential politics works. So generally what happens is there's this trial balloon where they'll trot out these potential nominees on the national media. Let's see how they do. Well, Andy Beshear was one of the first ones. He went on Morning Joe the morning after Kamala Harris said she was going to be running for president, and Joe Biden stepped aside. And he did a few more media hits like that. And then suddenly he's been taken off of the short list. And I think maybe there's something that Harris's team saw that they didn't connect with. But I would agree with you on the substance in terms of trying to expand the electorate, which is necessary in this kind of election. Andy Beshear would be important there. One thing I just got to mention, since you mentioned Brat, is when we're talking about connecting in the Midwest, it's not just about brat, it's also about brat, right? And if you have a candidate who can authentically go to, Brewers games, or who can go to Lions games and can be seen there tailgating with their brats and grilling and that type of thing, that culturally speaks to something, and more people need to talk about that too.
People need to talk about the brat movement.
Exactly. We're starting it right here.
Steven, you're so brat.
Thank you. That's the best compliment I've gotten all day.
Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
More Rising right after this.